So welcome everyone. I'm just this is Jessie Lynn, who you've probably heard when she was speaking in the summit.
Hello.
So she's co-hosting with me, so I can share my story today. She was very kind in offering that. So yeah, it's lovely to have you here. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes because we've still got a few more minutes, so people might continue to join us. So
Absolutely.
yeah. No, it's lovely. I've just come off a call with my Self-Rediscovery Foundations program group,
Nice.
and it was gorgeous. Yeah, so it's an evening of lovely conversations again for me.
It's so nice when you have those, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's lovely. So I'm feeling very grateful.
And it's actually it's 8 o'clock in the UK, so you're probably feeling a little tired as well.
Yeah, no, I'm okay actually, because I kind of knew that I had the calls this evening, so I had quite an easy morning. So yeah, it's quite
Nice.
I'm okay.
Nice.
Yeah. What time is it where you are? Is it
3.
3? Yeah.
Yeah.
Aw.
So still a good part of the day to go through.
Yeah. Lovely. I'm right, okay. Oh, still letting people in, so I'll just give it a moment.
It was weird, a Zoom call that I was on this morning.
Yeah.
On her end, it froze, and there was a message that came that said her financial information might be compromised.
Oh
so,
God.
she clicked off of Zoom. She
Oh,
was
bless
like,
her. Oh, that's not
I'd
good.
never heard that before.
No. Did did the meeting have a password? Because that's why I have added a password recently, because I think
It was just the two of us, so we didn't do a password.
yeah, no, I think they've advised to start using passwords, so that's why I added one for this, just because it's it's more difficult for people who aren't meant to be there to get access.
Yeah, I've heard some wonderful stories about
Yeah, I think
people
Jackie had a fun incident, didn't she? Bless her.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's crazy times. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll see if there's anybody else to kind of admit, then I will just keep admitting them, but I'll start introducing, and then yeah, we'll go from there. So yeah, just so that everybody, if anybody's new, knows how this works, we normally keep ourselves on mute, just so that we can kind of hear the speakers. So that's how it works. But obviously at intervals, we will come to questions. So at that point, you can either raise your hand, or you pop a message in the group chat as well. So yeah, any questions along the way, just pop a message in the group, or let us know that you want to come and join us live to ask a question or share any insight or anything like that. So the summit is all about self-rediscovery if you're new and you're kind of like, well, I don't know what this is about. And mostly my kind of reason for doing that is that mostly we come to self-rediscovery with the idea that we're kind of fixing, changing, or doing something to change who we are. And to become more of who we are. And so what this actually, for me, what my journey has been about is seeing that we're kind of it's more about seeing deeper who we are beyond kind of our humanness as well, although it's also about kind of dancing as who we want to play as well. So I'll be sharing a little bit more about that today because I'm sharing my journey, but we've been hearing from lots of lovely speakers about kind of their own journeys with the principles, with kind of how they've learnt to, or how they've kind of seen the wisdom behind life, I guess. And so we've explored lots of different topics. We're live every Friday, and then if people can't make it live, there's also a replay, so there's always something to dive into. So if you haven't caught up on all of those, they're all in there. if you want to catch up on them, and if you've got any questions along the way as well that you don't particularly want to ask live, then you can just reach out to me. There's also a Self-Rediscovery Facebook community, so I answer questions in there, or you can also email me at info@nicolebarton.co.uk. Yeah, so that's kind of the intro really, but I'm still just admitting a few people, but for now, today, we have the lovely Jessie Lynn with us. So she is here to be my co-host. She kindly offered to co-host this for us so that, well, basically, I wouldn't have to just do all the talking, because I'm going to share my story, but it's a little bit weird to introduce yourself, right? So, so yeah, thank you for doing this, Jessie Lynn, and it's lovely to have you. I know you've been on the summit and shared your own journey, so yeah, it's lovely to have your beautiful energy with us tonight. So I share
It's a
mine.
pleasure.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to you, and then we can go from there.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of your bio, because you're talking every week about everybody else's experience, but it's nice if people hear a bit about you and your background. So about Nicole. Nicole is a self-rediscovery mentor, speaker, and writer. She is something of a unicorn in the self-help industry, with her candid notion that nobody needs self-help. She is a breath of fresh air in her admission that while playing in anything leads us to a soul-led expression, it's a beautiful shift that shifts us from our head to our hearts. None of these practices are prerequisites to peace and joy. And I think we can definitely see that in all that she's bringing to this. Mm-hmm. Instead, she believes that we can play in them from choice, knowing that we are grounded in a wisdom that is already within us. Nicole supports people to embody their wisdom through embracing self-rediscovery via her online summit, Self-Rediscovery School group programs, foundations, and unravel, and client one-to-ones, as well as her events and retreats. And she's got a load of places that she speaks. I won't read them all out to you, but she's been featured as a speaker, a panel member, and facilitating leading well-being centers and festivals, including London Leading Centers, More Yoga, and the Life Center. Festivals such as the Balance Festival, Soul Circus, Rest Fest, The Awakening. It's exhausting. I don't know where she finds time to do anything. She's been on quite a few podcasts and radio talks, including Talk Radio's Badass Women's Hour, Jack Radio's Wellness Hour, A Little Peace of Mind, Unashamedly Human, Misunderstandings of the Mind, and Insightful Conversations. She's a keen writer and having written a plethora of publications, including Tiny Buddha, Simple Reminders, Yoga Magazine, Soul and Spirit Magazine.
Loads.
And she's currently working on her first book. How's that?
Perfect. And of course, I'm coming on your podcast soon as well, which is super
You are.
exciting.
Next Friday is our interview, so I'm looking forward to that.
So I'm excited about that.
I am as well, and that'll be fun. That's what got me thinking about this. So Nicole, like, self-rediscovery is such an important topic, but it's not one that a lot of people dive into. So can you tell us a bit about your journey?
Yes, I can. So I guess often when I talk about my journey, I kind of start quite young, because my journey isn't really like a special one. It's quite an ordinary one, but I'd say for much of it, I kind of had the experience of what I would call suffering. So I often have talked about kind of how to find freedom from suffering when I'm on these various podcasts, and by that, I guess my experience of suffering started quite early. So when I was 4, on my first day of school, my dad left, and so it was also the same week that I was meant to have an adopted sister arriving from Romania. So quite a lot of uncertainty, kind of, I got thrown into uncertainty, and I created a lot of meaning out of it, that I kind of wasn't lovable, or loads of different stories really, but at the time I obviously didn't see they were stories, and for much of my life that kind of created the experience of me working really hard to be more lovable. And so I learned really quite early on that we needed to do more. um, and at the age of 10, I developed chronic fatigue syndrome. So I burnt out and was unable to walk. So I was 10 years old, and I missed a year of school. And I guess after a year of being unable to walk, I did eventually kind of return to some kind of normality and kind of carried on with my life. I didn't really see anything different at that point, because I think I was too young to really know what was going on. But but when I was when I was growing up, I was still very much kind of really trying to force my way through life and try and live up to something. I don't know what I was trying to live up to, but it was basically me trying to be more lovable. And so I kind of pushed through life, built a successful but exhausting kind of career in brand management. I did my MBA, and I kind of had 2 jobs at the same time, and as well as doing that. And then at the age of 23, 24, I burnt out again with chronic fatigue syndrome again. So I was unable to walk for a second time. And also lost my job at this point, having just kind of bought a house. So that kind of left me in a little bit of a financial crisis. And then at the same time, I was also in a relationship with someone, and I was getting married, but their family kind of didn't like me. And in fact, I remember just before I got married, actually, just before the wedding, my partner's mum said, you know, I'm not going to lie, Nicole, but I've never liked you, but I'll try. And at the time I was so kind of feeling so unlovable and in such unlovable thinking that I gave her a hug and kind of thanked her for trying to love me, which I now kind of look back and I'm like, oh my goodness. You know, it's so interesting when you kind of look back at these things. And at the same time as that all going on, I also lost my best friend of 13 years, who left because just before my wedding, he said that he was in love with me. And so because I was obviously getting married, that was then really tough, because he disappeared, because he obviously felt that you know, he couldn't really continue the friendship. So I kind of lost everyone at that point. And it felt like I was there kind of left with people that didn't really like me and that everybody I had ever loved had kind of left. So it was very much at that point that I felt very broken and lost, not really knowing where to go, because I'd still got chronic fatigue at that point. I was really just in this kind of desperate state of feeling like I needed to find myself. And so then I guess feeling broken, it makes sense to kind of go and figure out how to fix yourself. So I got married, but because I felt really lost still, I again kind of dived in really hard to trying to get myself better, to find myself. So I took myself off to Bali, as you do when you're trying to find yourself. And so really I kind of dived into self-help, and at that point still trying to fix myself, and so I studied everything really in my search for who I was, and I studied everything from kind of you know, Reiki at Stonehenge through to yoga and meditation in Bali, and I really did kind of search the globe for who I was, and still felt that there was so much missing. Like I used affirmations and dived into kind of all the self-help tools and techniques, and I thought for a while that I'd found my inner peace when I was meditating, but when I got home I kind of realized that really wasn't the case. I still felt that there was something missing, and it just kept me kind of searching outside of myself for change all of the time. And what I found was that because I was still kind of experiencing chronic fatigue, that was quite exhausting, because I was living in my head the entire time. So it for me, it was it was a journey of kind of feeling very lost and very broken. And I guess from there, everything then kind of started to shift, because I one day met a mentor from the three principles, which is kind of what I've been pointing to the entire time in this summit, because it was that kind of really profoundly changed my life. And what they were saying kind of didn't totally make sense to me at first, but I think as as they were exploring it with me and I explored it more, it just had this sense of truth to it. And I remember the lady who was sharing it with me, Mandy Spray. She's lovely.
She's lovely.
Yeah, she's gorgeous. She just had this really beautiful grounded energy, and it kind of really spoke to me that she kind of felt very settled in what she was saying, and it felt really true. And so I guess that's kind of that started to shift things for me. And again, I'm the type of person who at that point was quite anxious and would try and write everything down and, and remember it and figure it out. But there was something about the way that she was sharing it that kind of made me sense into the idea that we didn't really need to do that, actually. And it was kind of like she was speaking to kind of my soul, for want of a better word, whilst also explaining how the mind worked. And it was that kind of helped me to see what this missing link was, and it started to make more sense to me that I was living my life through thought. So I guess for me, the way that I heard it was that it was the three principles was an understanding about life that explained how life worked. It wasn't something we needed to get. It wasn't something we needed to do or fix or change anything. It was just an understanding that explained that there was this deeper wisdom behind life, that I could trust, and that, you know, on top of all of that was just these layers and layers of thought that created our experience. So when we would have a thought, we would then have a feeling. The thoughts would create those feelings, and that created our experience of life. So in seeing that, it was kind of like, oh, this isn't how I've kind of come to see life so far, but it really felt true. And so I kind of played with it a little bit in my own life to see where it was true, and quite instantly it started to change things within me without me really doing anything. And I think that's something that I know a lot of my clients don't always trust, is that there's nothing to do. And it's, yeah, it was really freeing for me. And I'd had kind of, the way I worked with her was I had an intensive and kind of really dived into the principles. And as I did, just began to see so much so differently, because I think one of the early things that I noticed was I had always suffered with anxiety. And what I came to see was that I wasn't anxious. Who I really wasn't anxious, because who I really was kind of the natural intelligence of life kind of living me, and I was wisdom. But on top of that, I had a whole layer of anxious thinking, which created anxious feelings. And that's kind of how it made sense to me. It was like, oh, actually, I'm not anxious. Who I was born as wasn't anxious. And now all that's happening is I'm getting these anxious thoughts come in, and they'll kind of go on their own if I leave them to it, which was difficult, I guess, to trust on some level, but at the same time it wasn't, because I could feel that it was kind of true. And I did see that, you know, a lot of those thoughts did kind of just fall away without me really doing anything, which can seem quite far-fetched in a way, but it definitely happened.
I know.
And
so from the time that you first, like, she introduced you, or you heard her speaking, and then was it quite a short time frame then you had your intensive with her, or did you kind of go home and reflect and kind of start to see little things?
I think to start with, I did have kind of a conversation with her, and then almost immediately the next day I saw something differently. I remember at the time I was struggling with, I had a holistic therapy business, and people would just cancel last minute and not show up or things like that, and so that would make me quite cross, because I'd kind of sit there waiting for them and they wouldn't come, and that would make me cross. And then I remember the next day after chatting to her, instead of I had actually three clients didn't show up in a row. It was like wisdom was like, right, we'll teach you this one.
Yeah.
That had never happened. And so I remember just sitting there, and I didn't consciously do anything or think anything differently. I just remember thinking, oh great, I can go and have a coffee in the sunshine. And I was like, hang on a minute. Like, that's what's just happened there. Because basically, whereas before I'd have been really anxious about the money that I'd lost, or I don't know, that I'd been angry with them, it just all fell away. I didn't have any of that. And I just suddenly saw, oh my gosh, what has happened here? Because that's so different to how I would have responded, you know, in the past. So that was quite life-changing for me, because and then it was funny because I was sitting in the sunshine journaling about this when in this space that of not having clients, and I remember this, I had been to a meditation a few weeks earlier, or a few days earlier I think it was, and we'd been using leaves to like kind of just bring ourselves into kind of the present moment, and like rubbing them across our faces, listening for the sensations and things like that, kind of very much about living in the present moment. And this leaf just kind of plopped down out the sky and landed on my journal on her little post-it note with her number on. And I was like, okay, right, I get it.
Dominic would say that's definitely a
yeah.
a strong message coming through.
Yeah, so that was really lovely. So yeah, it's, in some ways it changed my life almost instantly. And I think it was just noticing how that was happening in a way. Because I think sometimes we can miss those things as well when we're very caught in our heads, the kind of subtle shifts that had happened. But over time, I kind of really started to see a lot of change in my anxiety, which basically just fell away. You know, I just kind of saw it as, you know, there would be an anxious thought that would come in a bit like a cloud, but the blue sky was the wisdom behind it, and I could see that cloud would kind of move on. And the more kind of resistance I had to that cloud, so the more I tried to change it with like affirmations, or, you know, trying to do something to get rid of the anxiety, the more clouds I was kind of adding. That's how it made sense to me. And so I kind of just eventually kind of stopped adding more clouds, and, and then the anxious thoughts would just go and, you know, flow on through, and I would have a new thought. And it was just kind of really seeing that in action in my own life that helped me, and seeing that there was this wisdom that I could trust beyond all of that. And I realized in that, I think one of the biggest insights that I had was that there was nothing to do, because we're not broken. And I think that's one of the biggest things that, for me, in the self-help industry, it's almost like perpetuating it. It's based on the assumption, self-help is, that we need helping. And so self-help kind of didn't really make any sense to me anymore. It's like, oh, we don't actually need self-help. And I think it was that changed my life, because instead of kind of spending so much time and energy on self-help and trying to fix myself, I realized I didn't need that. And so that's at the point really where I decided it was more self-rediscovery, because it's kind of almost a rediscovering of what's already there. And for me, that looks like kind of seeing that we're wisdom, and that's always been there. And once we see that, all the rest of it kind of falls away. So yeah, that's why I kind of then for a time kind of went on with like the argument of, well, we don't need self-help, ditch self-help and just see who we really are. And for a little while I got on my high horse about that. I think
everybody does. Everybody does. But you know, one of the things about anxiety, because that was the way that I kind of discovered the principles as well, is you still get it. You still get the anxious thoughts, but now you just kind of don't engage with them or give them a story. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, I'm having some anxious thinking right now, or I'm wearing some anxious goggles, and then you kind of move on. And that there's something so profound in just kind of noticing it, just being like, oh yeah, right, okay, and then just moving on from that.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And that's very much what I saw. But what was interesting was I kind of, at some point, I must have misheard, you know, it's just a thought, feelings don't matter. Like, oh, well, just a thought, forget
Mm.
that. And again, that kind of was another rediscovery, I guess, for me, because I was also actually trained as a homeopath, so I was kind of familiar with the idea of suppression. I'm just going to let somebody else in. Yeah, so I was kind of familiar with this idea of kind of suppressing our emotions, and that kind of didn't ring true for me. So when I first hear it, I did kind of think, well, it's just a thought, it doesn't matter. And I realized that I'd misheard that wasn't what the three principles was saying. It was sort of saying, it was explaining our experience. And so that doesn't mean that we don't still fully experience our experience, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was very much something that again I kind of misunderstood and then came to see something deeper about. And it's that seeing deeper that feels like a self-rediscovery as well. So yeah, that was an interesting one. And I also remember kind of learning really that meant we didn't need to be afraid of our experience. And I know that's something that Sydney Banks said, and that kind of allowed me to live more in the moment, be more present, and be okay with kind of whatever was going on. And one of my favorite quotes, I think this is probably where I heard this best, is Jeff Foster, because I love Jeff Foster's poetry.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of his quotes, which is one of my favorites, was that feelings arise to be held, not healed. And that really kind of resonated with me, because I was like, oh no, yeah, it's not that we don't have the experience, it's that we can hold ourselves through it, and that's because we're being lived by wisdom. So actually it became then about seeing that we can accept all of our experience. We might not feel comfortable with it always, but we can always hold ourselves through that experience. And again, that spoke to me more about kind of the self-help industry, where we're trying to constantly replace bad feelings with good ones and force positivity. So again, I got on my high horse about how we don't need to do that. And I'm very much talking about how we can accept and embrace all of our journey. And so a big part of self-rediscovery for me, again, is that kind of acceptance of the richness of all of our experience. And that definitely gave me a different experience of suffering. So I then was kind of saying, you know, we all suffer, or we all experience suffering at times, but we can have a different experience of it when we understand why we're suffering. And so my experience of suffering at that point became very different. You know, my anxiety and because of my anxiety making me live kind of less in my head, the illness and again kind of settled, and I got better, because it was exhausting kind of living in my thinking all the time. And as I kind of allowed that to just be there, and even kind of accepted being ill, and that was okay too, you know. A lot of the fear and a lot of the illness, and well, all of the illness actually, and all of the anxiety did kind of fall away, because you know we can still get anxious thoughts or fearful thoughts come in, but when we don't resist them, they fall away a lot faster. So it kind of dropped me into this more settled space, where I was definitely having less thinking that was kind of what I would judge as negative. And I always say, you know, the negative stuff is still our judgment of it, and you know, even the good stuff is made up. So it's all made up. But just seeing that helped me kind of feel this kind of foundational grounding of peace. And it was a freedom that I hadn't really felt before, I guess, because I had felt that I'd suffered for much of my life. But in that, I was kind of rediscovering a new way of life through this understanding. It did very much feel like I'd just been given this foundational grounding, this settledness, and life became easier. And I would never
Kind of like you're putting a new playground, and the playground is there for you to go and explore and discover and get curious about. And
I love that.
and
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I didn't necessarily see the kind of playground element of it for a little while. I did see a lot of things. So I had I guess I did, but it's become clearer more recently. But there were different things. So I started to see my relationships in different ways, and I remember I was studying in London, and I came across a challenge that I needed somewhere to stay, and where before I would have kind of very much worried about where I was going to stay, and because at the time I didn't have a lot of money, I just spent a lot of money on this course. I actually ended up kind of what I kind of now call manifesting. And Dominic Scafidi kind of allowed me to use that word, I guess, again, because I was very anti-manifestation and the law of attraction.
Likewise, yeah.
Until recently. But I kind of manifested this. Actually, a friend had a £13 million mansion in London. So I actually ended up living in that whilst I was studying, which was hilarious to me, because I was like, this would never have happened before. Like it's just not something I could have ever imagined. But what again was funny about that was I was like, well, this is great, I'm manifesting this, but there were still challenges with that, because I found myself living with some really interesting housemates. And by that I now refer to them as the hamster murderer, the hostage negotiator, and the hitman, because that is literally who I was living with.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a true
Instead of the 3 P's, it's the 3 H's.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I would judge them not particularly pleasant. but the first day I moved in, the hamster murderer said to me that she had killed a hamster when she was young, because she grew up in care and she wasn't allowed to take it home from school because she didn't have a home to take it to. And so I kind of worried for my life after that. On the first day I moved in, and yeah, hid my pillows, which was probably quite right, because later down the line she decided to steal my room, and I just came home one day and found all my stuff in a different room. Of course, the old me would have gone mad at that, and I did suddenly find myself in quite a lot of distress, actually, even though I knew the principles. I kind of was like, how could she do this? I'm so angry, how could she make me out to be so unimportant? Because unimportant was one of my stories, because I was unlovable. So it kind of brought all that back up. But it was really interesting what I saw in that, because where once I would have just responded immediately to that anger, I kind of sat back and I began to see that relationship differently, and I kind of got curious about what life looked like to her. And as I did, I started to see that maybe actually to her it looked like she needed the best room, because she had had to fight for that her whole life living in care. And that gave me compassion and kind of returned me back to the love that is our kind of natural state underneath all of our thinking. And so that played out very differently to how it might have done pre-principles.
You said something like, there's the thing, having an understanding of the principles doesn't mean that we're not human. So you still have the reactions and the feelings and the experiences come through. It's just with the understanding, you can kind of react to them or kind of take a little bit of a step back. And that's the beauty of all this.
Yeah.
It's because you can still get caught up in the moment and then just kind of realize it's a moment and let it pass.
Yeah, exactly. And it just allowed that space. I kind of, where I once would have just instantly reacted because I believed my thoughts to be true. She was this nasty hamster murdering person that needed to be kind of, taught that, you can't treat me like that. That just all fell away, and I started to see that there was a reason that she was walking around doing that, because she had a set of thinking in her little thought bubble that looked a different way to how my thinking looked in my thought bubble. And in the end, we ended up kind of going for a coffee and talking about it, and yeah, just a totally different kind of experience of that. And so it did kind of change how I interacted with people in my relationships, which I had basically seen as, her as if, she was my mother-in-law or my dad, and reacted from there. But at that point I was still married, and I wasn't overly happy in my marriage. So I guess this was kind of a blind spot. But at that point I had heard, because my partner very much liked the kind of where we lived in the village that he'd kind of grown up in, and I wanted to kind of explore the world and live in London. So it looked like to me we were very different. And what I had heard in the principles was that you can make any relationship work. And so what I actually would say is that I do agree with that, because what it helped me to see in that was that regardless of our differences, there was still love there. And so I had a very much easier experience of that relationship, even though I wanted to be in different circumstances. And so, but the interesting thing was that I also still felt like, well, you know, we're human and we only get kind of one chance at life. And so I kind of battled back and forth in my head with this one, because I was like, well, I need to make a decision, you know, do I want to leave or do I want to stay? So this was kind of another area where I was still rediscovering, you know, how it worked in relationships, I guess. And I remember somebody saying to me, it was Jenny Anderson actually, who's also been on the summit, and she, I can't remember who told her, I think it was Terry Rubenstein, said to her the same thing, and she said to me, Nicole, there's no decision to be made, but a decision will be made. And again, it was like, oh yeah, I don't need to make that choice right now. And it was right, because eventually we did end up splitting, not because of a decision, but it just kind of, wisdom again kind of made it that was kind of a no-brainer. And I remember just seeing so much in that, because I realized that yes, we are kind of, you know, we're wisdom and anything, and we're love, and we can still find peace within a relationship that we might not feel comfortable in, but also we're human and we get to choose how we want to live our lives as well. So there was kind of more insight at that point, because for a long time it had been about finding freedom from suffering. And so I'd kind of found freedom with suffering, but I kind of hadn't seen that we were also creating our experience of life, and that could be kind of fun to play in as well. And I remember just thinking, you know, suffering's overrated. We're kind of creating it and we don't need to do that. But what if I could create something fun? So I kind of dropped in again to a rediscovery of playing in our humanness. And I remember Jackie Ford, when she came on the summit, saying, you know, every thought is a gift. And that really kind of, again, rung true to me, because it's like, oh yeah, literally every thought is a gift. And that means that we can create whatever we want. And we're always creating our experience, whether we perceive it as bad or good. And for a time, I'd kind of, when I came across the principles, I had avoided kind of any spiritual practice, because I kind of assumed that we didn't really need it. So in this, I kind of realized, oh yeah, but I loved doing yoga and I loved meditating. So actually, what if I just play in enjoying that? And so I think at that point, it was kind of the first time that I really started playing in the humanness of me as well. So whilst I saw that there was this kind of foundational grounding of wisdom, and that's who we were and nothing could take that away, and I also saw that we could be okay with our suffering, I started to then, because suffering's a part of the human experience, so I really saw that, you know, our human experience is to be embraced, you know, even the suffering, but I didn't quite see that it was to be embraced in a fun way. So amidst my divorce, I guess I traveled and started playing in things that I wanted to do. So this is when I talk about, you know, self-rediscovery is really seeing who we are beyond thought. I then also began to see that it can also be us playing in our humanness as well, and playing in creating. So I kind of traveled off to Bali and Vietnam and Cambodia and Singapore, and that again was another journey of self-rediscovery, because I was seeing the principles in action, but I was also seeing new things about myself, and mainly the idea that I had been an only child for my entire life, and I hated being alone. But I was traveling the world on my own, and I realized I really quite loved being alone, actually. And I'd always feared it when I was kind of in my abandonment thinking, I guess. And so that was kind of a real time of embracing not just the kind of messiness of life, which it at times very messy because I was going through my divorce, but the kind of full spectrum of its richness as well. And so I kind of look back on that time now and see that I was kind of dancing and being me, you know, with that foundational grounding of wisdom and knowing that's who I really was, and so all the rest was kind of made up, but I could still play in all of the other stuff as well. And so I kind
You,
of
you kind of refer to
dancing.
that as like unraveling the life. What is it? Unraveling a life that you love, kind of thing. And that's the spirit I so see in you.
Yeah, and that's when I started to see that, because I hadn't really seen that there was this joy um, kind of available to us, and yeah, so that's kind of where my journey began to be more about, less about suffering and more about kind of, yeah, unraveling a life we love, which is kind of why this is what I point to in the summit as well. It's like, well, we can find freedom from whatever we're feeling stuck with. We can find freedom from feeling lost and broken by seeing who we are and getting that foundational grounding. But we can also have a lot of fun with life and unravel it in ways that we kind of wanted to, and to create a life we love from that, just by seeing that we're always creating from wisdom, and we get to kind of play and dance in creating through that. And Dominic again, Dominic Scafidi came on the summit the other week, and he was talking very much about this kind of, he described it as this co-creation between divine wisdom and our human desire. And that's really what I started to see, but he put great words to it the other week, so I'm teaching
He's
that
got a
because,
gift for that.
yeah. But I started to see that more and more, and yeah, now I kind of feel like it was then about kind of dancing in the human experience and playing with it. And like Jackie said, it's a gift. You know, thought is a gift. So where I'd once seen that thought was kind of made up and didn't really matter, it was like, actually no, it's a gift. We only get one shot at this kind of human experience. And it's funny because recently all these Sid Banks quotes keep jumping out at me, and they're all saying the exact same thing. And it's, you can read, you know, all his books and hear them in one way, and for a time I heard them in a way about finding freedom from suffering, because that's what I was dealing with. And now I can read the same book and hear it about discovering joy. And it really does change, you know, how you're seeing the world changes how you interpret what he was saying.
I think it's also moment to moment. It's when you're reading something or you hear a quote, it's kind of whatever experience you're in that moment. And it sounds like when you were first came across this, you were in a state of, you know, your state of mind was suffering. And so that's what you would see when you were looking into the quotes. That's what you would see coming out of it. And then when you switch and you're in this place of creativity and joy, you see something completely different from the same words, but just maybe used in a different way or a different lens that you're looking at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened. And yeah, it's just amazing to see that we're always kind of creating our reality in that way. And yeah, a whole new world kind of opened up as I began to kind of play in that creation and rediscover kind of the spiritual practices that I'd abandoned, and but it felt like what had happened was, whereas once I had felt that I needed them, it then became that I was choosing to play in them. And I think that's where the freedom was for me. It was like, oh yeah, I don't need these, but I can still choose to embrace them, because if there's something I love doing, then why not? And I have to say, I didn't pick up affirmations again, because that just didn't make sense to me at all. I remember when I first was before the principles, I would sit in front of the mirror, you know, with my affirmations and be like, you know, I am worthy, and then I just end up crying because I didn't believe them. And then I just felt like I was a failure at the affirmations.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't particularly helpful. So again, affirmations don't, for me now these days, feel like a helpful thing. But what I do notice, I guess, is that I focus less on anything that might have kind of made me feel like I would suffer before, and without me trying, and instead look towards a direction of joy, if that makes sense. So even just
Yes.
things where, you know, years ago they would have really, really wound me up, even months ago. And instead of kind of ruminating on that, I there's something within me that just goes, well, you could just choose joy instead, and I just change that focus. Or maybe the focus changes within me, I don't know. I haven't quite worked out which way around that's coming from, you know. Whether kind of focus is just naturally occurring, which it feels like it is actually. But yeah, it's interesting how that kind of shifted.
It's a nice flow, isn't it? It's just, it seems like life flows in that way. It flows better, it flows easier, and it's easier to see joy. That's what I find anyways. It's like one of these things
Yeah.
where it's gorgeous to be able to look at something and look, like you say you love doing yoga, then do yoga.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing more to it than actually the fact that it's just something that makes you happy. So do it. And without thinking about it too much or putting judgment or meaning to it.
Yeah. And that's something that I often kind of say to my clients, you know, is what lights you up, and follow that. But with the caveat of knowing that whatever it is that is lighting us up is still kind of coming from within us, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Because I used to very much think that it was the yoga that was making me feel better and lighting me up. But actually,
Yeah.
that's still coming from me. And I remember Dickin Bettinger saying about how he would, you know, go and sit in this one tree, the same tree over and over again, because he felt like he had this great feeling from the tree. And he realized,
Yeah.
oh no, the feeling's coming from me. It's just it looks like
Yeah.
it's the tree. And so I often kind of point to that, because it's like we can play in these things all we want, as long as we remember that. We don't have to remember it, but it seems like to me, when I'm kind of pointing people in a direction, that good feeling still comes from us. It's still arising within us. It's not the external thing that has kind of given us that light feeling, or, you know, whatever it is. Yeah, so I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but
It
um,
does. It
yeah.
does. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. You can see this, but how does this, like, how does life look now when you look at this with all this kind of looking beyond the suffering then, and you've got the joy? Where's Nicole at today?
Yeah. And that's, yeah, again, it's like, for me now, I can honestly say that life is just kind of really exciting and really joyful, and regardless of the circumstances. So, you know, at the moment, obviously with COVID, and at the moment I'm on lockdown, in the middle of a house purchase, so I'm staying with my parents, and it's all a bit chaotic, and yeah, it could really look like suffering at times, but it really hasn't been that sort of experience. It's been a lot of joy and a lot of creativity and a lot of fun. So again, Dominic was talking about how our human desire is a call to be all that we are, and I feel like we kind of get that foundational grounding in sensing who we are, and knowing that we don't need anything outside of ourselves, and we're kind of not attached to the outcome. So I found very much that the creativity is just kind of flowing through, and playing kind of in creating becomes this fun choice, kind of driven by human desire. um, but since I've seen it that way, everything's kind of just, yeah, has unraveled in a way that's really, yeah, joyful. Is just the way that I would explore it. And anything that we want to create in life is already within us. I think that's one of the things that is the key takeaway for me, and what I'm starting to see. So for example, now in my business, my business is really, I really love creating, and I love supporting people, and so it's kind of just unraveled. Even in recent months, I very much move from wisdom, and it's about deep listening for me, and deeply listening to what I'm being called to do or moved to do. And so by following that and following the joy, my business has kind of unraveled into being able to help support people who are on their own kind of journey of self-rediscovery. And there's something just so, I don't know, soul nourishing, it feels like to me. It's like I'm really grateful to be able to do that, and it's something that I never would have really, again, imagined with my thinking mind that was possible, especially when I was, back in the business, back in those days of my business where it looked like clients didn't show up. That's completely changed. I don't really do anything for clients to come to me. It's just I'm having fun and showing up to support people, and that kind of just naturally happens, and it feels like there's this kind of abundance in life that I never would have necessarily seen before, and so life's very different now, and I'm just buying a beautiful new home, and I'm also pregnant, so I'm having a baby with with the best friend I mentioned, who had said that he was in love with me. So that all worked out again. Wisdom kind of worked that all out. So yeah, there's a lot of joy now, and it feels like, yeah, it feels beautiful. It feels very, again, in flow and from wisdom, and I just enjoy really helping people to have that same kind of beautiful experience of more deeply listening to who they are and kind of playing in who they want to be, and that's how I'm kind of living at the moment. And it's great whilst you're in it. Like I say, it's moment to moment, like we've said, so it's not that that's always going to be 100% of the time the experience that we're having. We'll still have moments of suffering, and I still do, but they are fewer and further between. It's a different experience, but yeah, it's more kind of a fun game of unraveling a life that I love now these days. It feels.
You think that that was always available, but there was resistance there, and resistance meaning you're kind of not looking in that direction because you're looking in so many other directions because you think that's where the answer is, or that's where, the joy is, of the happiness, the validation. But then it's kind of like when you realize that's not where it is, and you start to shift the way that you're looking at it, because it's like, it just seems like since you had that shift, your life has just unfolded beautifully. So it's like you've let go of the resistance part of it, and life is now just happening and flowing. And it doesn't mean that you don't have moments of maybe anxious or whatever, but it just seems like things have just unfolded beautifully for you.
Yeah, I think before I just didn't see what was possible. I think
Yeah.
it felt to me like the only thing that was possible really was freedom from suffering, and once I got to that point, I was kind of relieved, to be honest. But then I still didn't see the full possibility of what was available. I kind of just felt like, well, that's great, I found peace, and for a while that was enough, and peace is still there, but it's also like, oh no, but there's joy available as well. It's like,
And
yeah,
joy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's really, yeah, it is. I just didn't see it. I didn't see it as an option, I guess. Like you say, it was just something that I didn't see. And for me, it feels like the three principles is just a way of illuminating stuff that we haven't seen before. And once we see it, we can't unsee it.
You kind of let go of the narrative. Or you don't give it the same kind of value that you would have before. The narrative can still be there, but
Yeah,
it just kind of loses its importance or shine.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And again, it's not something that I was particularly looking for. It wasn't like I was like, where's the joy, come on.
Yeah.
Again, it just came to me. It was like an insight just came in that I couldn't have forced or tried to find, as much as I probably tried, to be honest, to kind of see something different about, I don't know, so much of all of that. It is very much, it feels in the kind of letting go, like you say, the lack of resistance and the acceptance of what is. And that's kind of where it feels like the freedom kind of comes in by itself. It's like everything drops away, and you just see something new when you get to kind of, and again, it's not like we are trying to accept. It's not, again, that acceptance becomes something to do, because I know that can feel, again, like another place to get to at times. But it kind of just happens the more, for me, it was the more I stayed in conversation about the principles, because it's just always, every conversation kind of illuminates something new. And again, it's not to say that we need to do that either, because wisdom's always there for us. It's always within us. But it certainly helped me. And that's kind of, again, the reason why I created the summit, because I get to have fun conversations every Friday. And yeah. So,
And they have been beautiful conversations, and it's such a nice opportunity for different people to get exposed to different people. So that's really nice. I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions for Nicole, or any parts of her story that you want to chat about.
let me just have a look. Is there anything? Oh, Jackie says, I've been with the 3 Ps for over a year. I still have days where it feels like it's outside in. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Jackie, did you want to come on? I just noticed you've, I'll just unmute you. There you go. Jackie?
Oh, hi.
Hi. Sorry.
I didn't realize I was unmuted. Yeah, I've been with the 3 Ps for, well, probably about a year and a half. And I'm beginning to see that it's coming from the inside out rather than the outside in, but there are still days when I swear it's coming from the outside in. And then that's where I struggle and fight and resist. And
Yeah.
I think when you're in that space, Jackie, that's where it seems like that's where, when you're struggling and fighting. I remember when I did I think I did it with Karina, the facilitator training with Rudy and Jenny. And I remember saying once that I had the exceptions to the principles. I was sure I did for a couple of people in my world. I swear they were the exceptions. But I remember Rudy saying, it's not what you think. It's not the content, it's that you think. And it was like, and I didn't get that for a long time. And then just one day when I wasn't thinking about it or trying to understand it, it just kind of went, oh, I got it in that way. It's everybody. I think everybody goes from outside in, inside out. I think that's human nature, I think just be kinder and gentler to yourself for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I know, like, when the weather changes and I think of the sky, and then all of the clouds, moving and doing their own thing, and I'm thinking that's what our thoughts are doing also.
Yeah.
And there's no way we can just pick them and choose. And
No, and I think, again, it's as Jessie Lynn says, it's, for me, it's when we're in that space, it's like we can just be kinder to ourselves, and kind of not with the aim of anywhere to get. It feels like there's, we can be so tempted to try and understand the principles until we remember that it's just a way of explaining how life works, much like kind of how we know that gravity works. We don't really need to understand it, but it still holds us to the earth. So it's just explaining that how the mind is working. And so in moments we won't see it at all, and that's okay. I don't know.
yeah, I know right now with this coronavirus thing going around, I've heard so many people say, oh my God, my anxiety, and I've never had anxiety before. And, and this is causing me anxiety.
Yeah. And also the other thing that comes to mind as you say that is that often, and I've seen this with clients who have kind of had worries about health anxieties, and then the coronavirus has come in, and it's almost like we're hit with kind of the biggest fear that we've got. And in those moments of fear, there's a lot of resistance, but it always seems to me and many of clients that kind of those are the moments where we have an opportunity to see something new. And it's almost like that resistance comes in because it's hitting up against our belief system. Something's hitting up against our belief system, and then our mind will work it out for us, what it's going to hit. Yeah. So I don't know whether that.
Yeah, I know that I have a lot of health anxiety because I've had a couple of serious health issues over the last couple of years. So, but yeah, I'm still figuring it out, and
Yeah, just stay curious and stay open, I think
yeah.
is my best.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay.
Nicole, there's another question here. Do you find the more time you spend in the 3P that those fluctuations from outside in to inside out become less frequent as you settle into the ride of thought?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, hang on, let me just. So, do you find more time you spend in 3P? Yeah, I think again, it's that awareness for me. It's the more we spend in the conversation, to me it's just always pointing us in that direction. But again, we don't need to do that, because there is a wisdom within us that's always doing that for us anyway. It's just that for me, the conversations often offer us an opportunity to see it. So yeah, I think it's not necessary, but but it certainly helps. Again, it's that kind of dance between being human and, and knowing that there's wisdom there anyway. So I don't know if that helps, that one.
I don't know if it's that there's less time, or maybe just a more awareness that you don't have to do anything about it. Like you say, it's just happening. It's there. It can be, you know what, like my son this week, he's, you know, the homeschooling, we've been having like cold temperatures, and he wasn't getting outside, and he was getting more agitated, and knowing that I could just see that that's where he was coming from. So even if he was snarky with me, in the moment I might be like, oh my goodness, you know, like how, like, why are you saying this? But then it's like, you know what, stepping back. And I think that that's the gift, is that just knowing that the ride happens, and just kind of letting go and surrendering to that, versus kind of trying to figure it all out.
Yeah.
It does pass so much more quicker. that didn't sound very right.
Yeah, because again, we're just kind of adding more and more thought in if we're resisting it, and
Yeah.
it's just going to happen for us anyway. You know, there was literally nothing that I did to have my insights, and I could have tried as hard as I like to have had my insights, but it never worked. I couldn't force an insight. It just comes in when we're kind of open, and yeah, that's how it feels to me. Is and it can be difficult, I appreciate, when we're kind of living in our humanness to just trust that. But I think for me, again, something that helps is just seeing how wisdom's playing out in other areas of life. Like for me, I see nature, and you know, it doesn't have to be a spiritual understanding. It's for me just seeing that there's this wisdom in nature, you know, that grows the trees, and the trees don't worry about, you know, how they're going to grow their leaves back, and that wisdom is in action in nature, but it's the same for us. And that's kind of, again, something that helps me reflect. So it doesn't have to be that we're in the 3P conversation, although I certainly enjoy that. But it's evident everywhere in life if we look for it. So I don't know whether that helps as well. Oh, Daniel said, I think the weather example is a tricky one, because I swear sunny weather makes me feel more positive. I know it doesn't. It's just I have different thinking about blue skies and sunny in England compared to our trademark overcast. Yeah, it's funny. And again, yeah, it is still, yeah, coming from us. It's still our own mindset, but I don't know. I mean, if you enjoy blue skies, then I guess you're gonna still feel that that's having an impact. I still do that as well, and it's again playing in that humanness. It's like it's okay to feel that that's kind of, yeah, that we think that that's where it's coming from, but I think when we look for evidence that it's inside out, and it's kind of more obvious. I don't know if that helps.
I think trying to not understand why the sky is blue versus just being like, oh my goodness, the sky is blue. Because the sky is certainly not blue in Canada. It's very overcast and raining. Yeah. But I think just knowing that and enjoying that, that's what it is, versus trying to kind of understand why it's blue. So just enjoy the blue sky, Daniel. Just enjoy it.
Gorgeous. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. It's again that kind of presence, isn't it? Yeah.
Nicole, are there things that you're working on that you want to share? Because I'm sure I'd love to hear what you're doing.
Yeah, so at the moment, obviously there's the summit every week, which is really, really fun. And again, I'm just kind of creating that because I love doing it, and so many people are enjoying it as well, which is really, really lovely to hear. So I've got the summit, and then I also have my self-rediscovery school that I've launched, which is really to kind of, again, point people home to wisdom. So we have two programs, one that's going on at the moment, which is the Self-Rediscovery Foundations program. And that's, like I described, that kind of foundational grounding in kind of who we are. That's what that kind of helps point towards. And we explore that in a kind of group setting with kind of video masterclasses, which have been fun to create, and then kind of live group calls and support via a community as well. So that's going on at the moment. It's really, really filling me with joy and kind of gratitude, because there's a beautiful community that's come together for that, and a beautiful group. And then I've got also the Unravel program, which is kind of that second step into into the joy and creating and unraveling a life we love. So that's a little bit more embracing the kind of humanness of who we want to be and playing in that. And yeah, I've just been creating those and having a lot of fun with them. And then I work with people one-to-one as well, so which I really, really love exploring with people. So that's just what I'm kind of playing with at the moment. But
Sounds gorgeous. And you're cooking a wee one.
yes, exactly. Yeah. And that was again a beautiful seeing. It's even recently, it's like, again, just looking towards different areas where wisdom is playing out. You know, it doesn't have to be a 3P conversation. It just occurred to me that, you know, I'm creating a baby without doing anything. You know, cells
Right.
are just intelligently collecting within me. I'm literally doing nothing.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing, because it's like, well, that's wisdom in action, and I'm not having to do any of it. So yeah, that was a lovely kind of, again, another reminder of how it works. Yeah.
Gorgeous. So Nicole, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So again, where you signed up for the summit, there is my website. So it's nicolebarton.co.uk. And as with everyone else, I'll pop the link in the replay as well for anybody who's listening at home. And I'm always kind of open to having a conversation to see how I can support people as well. So if anybody has any questions, or you know, wants to kind of dive a little bit deeper, then I kind of have lots of different ways that people can work with me, whether that be kind of the Foundations group program or the Unravel group program, or I offer intensives, and then my one-to-ones as well. So I'm always happy to have a conversation to see if I can help you see something different, because
Nice.
you know, I think it's always a kind of a joint exploration to see how that's going to play out, whether I can support somebody to see something different that they want to see, or so yeah, I'm always open to that as well. But there's also lots of free resources on my website. So I write poetry, which again emerged kind of during my travels. It was something I hadn't really ever written, and it kind of just flowed to me just from nowhere. So I share that quite often on my Instagram, which is @wellbeingwriter. But there's some of my poems on my website, and my blogs are on there as well too. So there's loads of different resources on there if anybody wants to kind of have a little read, or whatever calls to them. So yeah, just use those, make use of them.
Well, this is nice. This has been really nice to hear your story. It's nice when you're hearing so many things and you're asking some really nice questions to others. So it's really nice to hear all about you.
Oh, well, thank you. And yeah, I'll be on your podcast very soon. So
Yeah, looking
sure
forward to that.
Yeah, there'll be more stuff uncovered. It'll be fun. Yeah, and thank you to everyone as well for coming and hearing about my kind of journey, and to you, Jessie Lynn, for being here and sharing it with me, because yeah, it's
a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I'll just do a few announcements actually about the next few weeks. Let me just find them. So Yeah, so next Friday, we have, it's the 22nd of May, same time, 8 p.m. BST, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We have the wonderful Bill Pettit joining us. So I cannot wait for this one. He's going to be here.
I have a mind crush on that man.
Oh, I love that, mind crush.
I do.
Yeah. So he's here to share his views on the topic of nothing lacking, never broken, embracing who we already are. So I'm really looking forward to that. I probably don't really need to introduce him, but I'll introduce him next week. But he was a self-declared unhappy psychiatrist for many years, and explains how meeting Sydney Banks basically changed his life, and how he works with people, and he's had some amazing well, he's just, yeah, he's got amazing kind of story to share. So and he's helped so many people across the globe. So really excited to have him here. And then after that, we've got the wonderful Judith Sedgman, who I absolutely adore again. And then we've got Jason Shears, who's going to be talking about addiction and how he's unraveled a kind of creative life as well. And then we have Linda Pettit here. She's going to be talking about the hidden gifts in grief. So yeah, loads of lovely conversations on the way, and yeah, really looking forward to it. So thank you guys for showing up, and yeah, if there are any questions, just drop me an email or a message, or hop over into the Self-Rediscovery community as well, and I'm always on hand in there. So but thanks for joining, and sending you lots of love.